It was a cold, quiet night in a small town. John sat alone in his living room, staring at the clock on the wall. The sound of the clock ticking loudly filled the silence. It was the kind of night where everything felt still, too still. That's when the phone rang, breaking the silence. John looked at the screen. The number was unknown. He hesitated for a moment. Who could be calling at this hour? But then, he picked up the phone. "Hello?" he said, his voice sounding a little shaky. At first, there was nothing but silence on the other end. He almost hung up, but then he heard a soft, whispering voice. "Help me, John." John froze. He didn't know who it was. He didn't even recognize the voice. "Who is this?" he asked, his heart racing. But there was no answer. The line went dead. The silence on the other end was chilling. John waited for a moment, staring at the phone. He tried calling back, but there was no signal. It was as if the call had never happened. The next few days, John tried to push the strange phone call out of his mind, but it didn't work. Every time he thought about it, a feeling of unease settled in his chest. Something about the voice, something about the call, kept bothering him. Then, one evening, as John was getting ready for bed, he heard a knock on his front door. It was soft at first, almost like a whisper. John's heart jumped. He walked to the door and opened it, but when he looked outside, no one was there. On the doorstep, though, was a small, folded piece of paper. John bent down to pick it up. The paper felt old and rough against his fingers. He opened it slowly and read the words written on it. "The help you need is closer than you think." John stared at the words for a moment, feeling a chill run down his spine. Who had left this? Why had it been addressed to him? His mind raced, but he didn't have any answers. Feeling both confused and uneasy, John decided to go to the local police station the next day. He thought maybe they could help him understand what was going on. At the station, John told an officer everything: the strange phone call, the mysterious note. The officer listened patiently but seemed to brush it off. "It's probably just a prank," the officer said, "but we'll check the number anyway." John waited for what felt like hours, hoping for some kind of explanation. Finally, the officer came back and shook his head. "We couldn't trace the number," the officer said. "It's not listed anywhere." John felt a knot tighten in his stomach. The officer wasn't taking him seriously, but deep down, John knew that something strange was happening, and he couldn't ignore it. That night, after leaving the police station, John couldn't sleep. He thought about the old library in town. It was a place full of forgotten books, stories no one really paid attention to. The library always felt different, like it held secrets waiting to be uncovered. The next morning, John decided to visit the library. It was a small, dusty building at the edge of town. When John walked inside, he saw the librarian, an older woman with silver hair and glasses. She looked at him, her eyes sharp as if she knew something he didn't. "Can I help you?" she asked in a soft voice. John explained what had been happening, the phone call, the note, and his feeling that something was wrong. The librarian listened carefully. After a long pause, she nodded and led him to the back of the library, where the oldest books were kept. She handed him a dusty old book and opened it to a page with a strange map inside. The map seemed old, the edges frayed and torn. It pointed to a house on the outskirts of town, a house that John had always found strange. People said it was haunted. The windows were boarded up, and the grass around it grew wild and untended. No one went near it. But the map in the book made it clear this was the place John needed to go. That evening, John drove to the house. The sky was getting darker, and the wind was picking up. He parked his car in front of the old house and stepped out. The air felt cold, and the trees around the house creaked in the wind. John took a deep breath and walked toward the door. He found a crowbar in his car and used it to pry open the door. The sound of the door creaking open echoed in the silence. Inside, the house was dark, with dust covering everything. The air smelled old and musty. John stepped carefully, his footsteps heavy in the quiet. He moved through the house, room by room, until he reached the last one. That's when he saw it, a painting of a woman hanging on the wall. The woman's eyes seemed to follow him as he moved closer. There was something familiar about her, but he couldn't place it. As he looked at the painting, he noticed something strange, a symbol in the corner. It was the same symbol that had appeared in the mysterious note. Suddenly, the floor creaked beneath his feet. John looked down and saw that the wall with the painting was moving. The wall shifted, revealing a hidden doorway. John's heart pounded in his chest as he stepped through the hidden door. Inside, there was a small room. It was empty except for a wooden chest in the center. John knelt down and slowly opened it. Inside the chest was an old journal. The pages were yellowed, and the writing was difficult to read. But as John flipped through the pages, he discovered something that made his breath catch in his throat. The journal was written by someone who had received the same mysterious phone calls and notes. It was like reading his own story. The journal described strange messages, secret tests, and warnings. It ended with a final, chilling note. The test will soon be complete. John, you are the final piece. The answers you seek are closer than you think. John's hands shook as he read the last words. The phone call, the note, the painting, the journal, it was all connected. He was part of something much bigger than he had ever imagined. And the test? It had only just begun.